Welcome to the Green Chair interviews. Today we have Michelle Hogue from the Faculty of Arts and Science with the First Nations Transition Program. Welcome, Michelle. Thank you for
Alyssa.
joining us. Today we would like to ask you, what is your philosophy of teaching?
I like my students to be able to think critically and to apply what they learn in the classroom to what they know in real life. But I like to approach it from a more contextual framework. So I like them to be able to have a context in their own current lives or something practical that they understand, so that when I'm teaching the theoretical, it makes sense to them.
Okay, so in a class of yours, what has worked and what has not?
When I work with my First Nation students, and particularly in science, that science paradigm doesn't really, the Western science paradigm in particular, doesn't bridge well with Aboriginal paradigm. And so what I like to do is use sort of an action research approach or the medicine wheel, where we begin with just a concept. So I introduce the concept very briefly and then have a practical, contextual, hands-on application. So something that the student might know or something that we can do in the lab or in the classroom, and it might be something through performative inquiry perhaps, or even just an example, getting the students up and out of their desk. And then I once they've done the practical, bridge that to the theory. So then I come in from behind and talk about how that applies to the theoretical, and then begin again. And so it's a cyclical process.
Okay, so how would you prepare for a typical class of yours?
Well, it depends on what the topic is, but usually what I think about is what would make sense to the student first of all. And so I look for a context, whatever that might be. If it's the First Nations students, then I look for something that might be culturally appropriate and bridge the other way. If it's in my mainstream classrooms, I again look for something that they would understand really quickly, and then work my lecture around that and the course materials around that. So it's kind of a backward approach more than beginning with the theory first.
How do you know when it's working for you and working for your students?
I know when it's working when the students click in, when they can make the connections themselves, and I know when they start asking questions that relate to things outside of the box or outside of what we're talking about, so they can make those connections themselves. Where I find it doesn't work or where they're struggling is when they can't bridge that to the theoretical, and for me that's a challenge, sometimes particularly with some science concepts and working when you're bridging paradigms. Okay.
So what would you say a typical class of yours looks like?
Well, because I teach in an interdisciplinary fashion, so I teach both in the classroom as well as the lab, I'm just going to talk specifically about the lab. So when I'm in the lab, we begin with the concept in a very small introduction. And then I have a very large component that is hands-on practical. And I allow the students to work through that process, whatever it may be, on their own. And I like them to work collaboratively together so that they can rely on each other. And I am more just a facilitator initially. And then as we become more complicated and in depth, then I begin to sort of step in and give them more guided practice. But I like them to work at things on their own, and my job is to then explain the theory later on. And so I give some introductory theory, but I like them to do the practical first, and then come at it again in a more academic fashion after that.
So how do you design your class to accommodate for the different learning styles?
Well, in the First Nations Transition Program, many of the students who come in are at a lot of different levels. And so what I try to do is get everybody to a common level, whatever that might be, and then work from there. But I like to address different learning styles. Some students are more hands-on, and so I try to address a more practical end of it. Other students are more theoretical, and so then I try to give concepts that I can use through theory and practice. So I try to bring theory and practice together.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Michelle.
Thank you.